In today's video, we're covering some of the most terrifying crocodilian encounters. From a Florida Bay work crew ambushed by a lurking crocodile, to a midnight roadside stop in Louisiana turned into an alligator attack. But first, let's begin with our first story on a quiet Queensland river, where an early fishing trip ends in a deadly saltwater crocodile strike. It was July 14, 2015, a dry season morning at the Daly River boat ramp in Australia's Northern Territory. The light came in pale and flat, smearing a soft wash across brown-green water as the river tugged with the first push of the spring tide. The air had the chalky cool of dawn, the kind that thins quickly once the sun clears the tree line, and the ramp gleamed with a thin film laid down by the night. The ramp was a slanted slab sliding into brackish flow, flanked by mangroves whose roots rose like spears from sludge. Mudflats puckered with fiddler crab holes and tiny slide marks where crabs had dragged shells. A white sign, sun-faded and bullet-dented, warned, "Croc area, keep back from water." Paperbark trunks leaned over the parking bay. Cicadas droned in invisible chorus. On the far bank, pontoons clumped in a ragged line. The river looked slow and lazy on top, but beneath the surface the current funneled along the submerged ledge, where bait fish flashed and vanished. A busted crab pot rusted near the reeds. The ramp's lower lip broke the flow, making a seam where foam gathered and drifted, a strip that habitually funneled scraps and stunned mullet. A tinny idled 100 meters downstream, then cut its engine, the sound swallowed by distance and trees. Liam Hart, 28, a primary school teacher from Darwin, stood with a graphite rod tucked under his elbow. He kept his gear neat, box of shallow divers, leaders coiled, spare split rings and a small pill pin. Weekends were for Bara, and his cousin Matt, 34, a diesel mechanic, was the one with the tinny and the optimism to chase tides before breakfast. They made the run before dawn, thermos in the tray, talking work and football until the turnoff, where conversation dropped away and the river became the only clock. The plan was simple: launch at first light, work shallow divers along mangrove edges, and be back on the road before the sun locked the flats down. They slid the aluminum dinghy off the trailer, outboard lifted, hull rasping the concrete. Matt steadied the stir line against the bollard, looping it twice. Liam clipped a lure with a quick uni and tested the hooks against the fingernail. He stepped onto the upper ramp and made an underhand flick at a low root, feathering the spool to land the lure tight. It snagged immediately, the trebles pinning into algae slick bark. He worked the rod tip, the line pinged and stayed put. He set the rod in the holder and stepped down, boots finding purchase on the wet concrete. He kept a meter back from the lip, body angled sideways, one hand on the leader, the other on a pair of long-nosed pliers. The lure hung just within reach, metal winking as the ramp seam pulled and released. Behind him, Matt checked the bungs, lowered and primed the outboard. Up the car park, an engine coughed to life, tires crunching. The saltwater crocodile is the largest living reptile. Adult males commonly exceed 4 meters. Old bulls run larger still. Eyes and nostrils ride high on the skull, keeping nearly the whole body hidden while breathing and watching. The skin carries pressure-sensing organs along the jaws to read ripples. They specialize in edge ambush, ramps, cut banks, root lace, fords, waiting just beneath and launching in a short, explosive burst. Liam leaned, pliers open. The river bulged once, a small bow wave pressing against the ramp lip. A thick head pushed through the surface with almost no splash. The jaws opened, pale mouth flashed. The gap closed in less than a second. Contact came mid-shin, teeth seeded through fabric to bone. Pressure compressed the muscle against the tibia. The pliers dropped and clinked once, then disappeared. Liam's right foot lifted from the concrete, as the crocodile reversed. Matt shouted and lunged for the stern line, but the pull was already on. A clean backward slide that threw Liam off balance into the brown water. His left knee struck the ramp edge. The joint twisted and popped. The crocodile released its regrip, surfaced at an angle, and clamped higher across the pelvis. The tail sculled side to side, throwing bands of water that boiled the seam to foam. Matt swung the hull out, aluminum banged the ramp. The crocodile rolled. The first rotation dragged Liam fully under. Bubbles and a torn foam strap surfaced and spun. The second roll tightened, the bite shifting to a firmer crossbody hold. A crack sounded from Liam's ribcage as the torso compressed across the tooth line. The tinny spun half a meter from torque on the stern line. The crocodile settled, submerged, then rose half a meter downstream, still holding Liam crosswise. It made a third roll that sheared gear from his belt, pliers pouch, clip-on multi-tool, a small whistle, loose items tumbling once before the river took them. The head dipped. The back ridges slid under. The water smoothed except for a single tap of hull-on tooth near the surface. Then nothing. There was no resurfacing. The ramp seemed closed back over itself. The only motion was crab claws waving in holes along the mud. Liam did not return. Death came from massive trauma compounded by drowning. Rangers followed belly slide marks and spotlighted eye shine that night, locating and removing a 4.6 meter male frequenting the ramp. Matt survived uninjured and notified authorities at the site. They chalked new lines on the concrete, shifted signage higher, and discussed chain barricades across the lower slab during spring tides. Locals talked about habits, about distance, about how little water a crocodile needs to cover a meter. From Australia's tidal mud, our path crosses the ocean to a Florida maze of markers and mangroves, where a routine workday turns unforgiving. It was April 22, 2013. Late afternoon drifted over Florida Bay. The air was dense and still near channel marker 9. Heat pressed flat against the water until the horizon blurred. Tea-brown shallows spread in all directions, dotted with mangrove keys and sand tongues just high enough to catch a prop. As the tide eased out, slick lanes opened between turtle grass and mud. Ospreys wheeled overhead, mullet flipped and rings faded. To the west, thunderheads climbed. Marker 9 leaned seaward, its base scoured clean and ringed with barnacles. Nearby, a John boat idled with its prop lifted, hull ticking as hot metal met cool water. Carlos Mendez, 35, was contracted to re-stencil and straighten navigation posts. In the bow, he wore a faded work vest with a radio clip high and a pencil behind his ear. Behind him, one crewman handled the bucket of marine enamel and stencils, the other a push-pull and brace timber. They aimed to finish 3 markers before the shallows became impassable and the ramp clogged at dusk. The process was routine. Nose up to the post, tie the bow line, check it with a level, scrape barnacles, brace the lean, paint, and move on before the wind spoiled the edges. The tide slid another notch. They pulled toward the listing marker, bow gliding over a mottled patch of grass and sand. The nose of the John boat nestled against the post with a dull, hollow thud. The stern snagged in turtle grass, canting the boat. Carlos cleated the bow line and checked it. The marker's slight lean, annoying on a moonless night. Simple job, quick fix. He stepped onto a mud shelf, boots sinking through his ankles. It felt firm, then slick. Bracing the bow line on his hip, he shoved, and the hull shifted slightly. Behind him, one crewman shook the paint can while the other set the brace to lever. American crocodile, native to South Florida's coastal brackish waters. Long, tapered snout, lighter green-gray coloration. Less massive than a saltwater crocodile, but it's still fully capable of killing large prey. Strikes begin within 2 body lengths, launched by a sudden vertical or lateral surge from a low profile. Tail sculling adds torque and speed. The surface ahead of Carlos compressed, as if a sandbag had been dropped just under the water. The change was small and quick, a bulge, a line of dimples, a sudden gap in the glare. A head rose, flat and pale, pupils slitted. The jaws opened, showing a wet gleam of pink. The crocodile surged. The upper jaw cleared the mud lip, the lower jaw swept up from below. The first bite closed around Carlos's right thigh at mid-femur. Denim folded. Skin and muscle flattened against bone. The bowline snapped taut across his hip and yanked him sideways. The boat lurched. Stencil plates clattered. Carlos slid off the shelf into the tea-brown shallows. His left boot stuck for half a heartbeat, then torn free with the suction. The crocodile reversed, tail bleeding a clean arc that threw a sheet of bay water across the bow deck and smeared paint down the gunwale. The grip loosened, only to shift. The head surfaced again on Carlos's torso. The jaws clamped sideways across the lower ribs, a crossbite that locked his upper body against the tooth line. Air burst from his mouth in a stitch of bubbles. The crocodile's tail sculled harder, cutting a path backward along the marker's scour trench, where the bottom dropped just enough to cover everything. The John boat slewed 90 degrees and slammed the post. The pusher lunged with the pole, thrusting blind. The crocodile rotated. The first roll wrenched Carlos's right shoulder. The joint gave with a dull pop and sagged under the life vest. Straps stretched, then snapped one by one as the spin continued. The water frothed and flashed with barnacled chips and enameled drips. During the second roll, the crocodile shifted its clamp to a firmer chest and abdomen bite, compressing the rib cage. Both bodies, reptile and man, vanished beneath the surface into tea-colored opacity. The crew stabbed with the pole and felt nothing but water and, once, a rasp, armored back sliding past, rough as a file. Rope, the paint man said, but the line lay under the bucket, soaked in enamel. A few feet from the marker, the surface bulged again. The crocodile rose 30 feet down current, still cross-biting. Carlos's arms limp along its flanks. A final twist. Half roll, half dive kicked a braid of bubbles. Then the shape flattened and slid under. Ripples spread, spaced wider, and smoothed. Silence returned to the flats. The brace timber drifted beside the post, and the push pole dripped brown water onto the deck. Overhead, ospreys circled while a distant skiff hissed through a channel and disappeared behind a mangrove key. The crew searched the seam in widening circles, pushing and probing, but the bottom, sculpted by storms and scours, offered too many pockets, too many places where the depth changed by inches that mattered. They called it in and marked the GPS. A ranger boat appeared as the first puffs of the sea breeze began to show on the surface, raising a faint chop that erased the last of the rings. Before dusk, park staff placed floating barricade lines, bright buoys around each leaning post to keep crews on deck instead of stepping on the shelves. Contractors were advised to work from the boat, keep limbs inside, and treat marker bases as potential ambush points in low visibility and falling tide. Marker 9 got a fresh coat of crisp white paint over gray-green to catch a flashlight beam from afar. By morning, the lean was fixed, and the water remained calm and unchanged. The numbers on Marker 9 gleamed white. Under a Florida bridge, a basking croc waits. Our next story begins at Card Sound. It was August 7th, 2017, and midday heat pressed hard on the old fishing pier beside Card Sound Bridge. A weekend crowd of locals and tourists lined the railings, phones ready for a glimpse of the greenback predators below. The sun baked the deck, heat rising through their shoes, while the air held the sharp scent of salt and fish. Beneath the pier, a shallow green channel ran toward a mangrove fringe, clear enough to see baitfish dart in the shadows. A sign on a piling read, "Do not feed crocodiles." Near the cleaning station, bait scraps and fish heads in the riprap left rainbow sheens on the water, while tour boats idled farther out and heat shimmered off the rocks. Marco Silva, 24, was a freelance nature photographer with a taste for risky shots. On this trip, he had two friends with him, Daniel, who carried extra gear, and Louis, who helped with lighting and backup photos. The plan was simple: get an eye-level, tight shot of a basking crocodile from beneath the pier, close enough for the scales and teeth to fill the frame. Marco believed it could be the kind of image to anchor his next portfolio. They followed a narrow path down the loose riprap, rocks shifting underfoot and barnacle shards crunching into the shallows. Marco reached the bottom first, spotting a pale head in the shadow line. He stepped onto a flat boulder, one shoe braced in the water, while Daniel and Louis stayed higher with their cameras ready. The crocodile floated still, eyes and nostrils just above the surface. In the upper Keys, American crocodiles often use man-made structures like piers, bridge pilings, and riprap banks for both warmth and hunting grounds. They'll bask in the shade to stay cool, then patrol the edge where fish guts and scraps collect. A ground and splash rush can close 5 to 7 meters in seconds, even in knee-deep water. Once they clamp down, the bite's crushing force can break bone instantly. Rolling multiplies torque through bite, twisting prey and tearing tissue. These animals are opportunistic, using structure and cover to get dangerously close before striking. The crocodile's head lifted first, the subtle rise masked by a faint ripple from the tide. What had looked like a short body under the waterline extended in a smooth, deliberate motion. Then came the surge. Water jetted out from behind the tail as it drove forward, the distance closing almost instantly with only a single slap against the surface. Marco shifted his weight for a better angle, and his leading foot slipped on the slick algae film. Before he could regain balance, the crocodile's jaws closed around his right calf. Teeth pierced skin and muscle, grinding into bone. The impact wrenched him off the boulder, knocking the gimbal from his grip. It hit the rock with a sharp clack before sliding into the water. The crocodile jerked backward, dragging Marco into the channel in a clean, decisive haul. His head went under, bubbles rising in a scatter as he twisted to break the surface. The crocodile released its initial grip, only to re-bite higher along his thigh. A short, violent lateral shake sent a fan of water spraying over the riprap, scattering bits of floating bait from earlier in the day. Daniel scrambled down the rocks, pole in hand, while Louis grabbed a length of rope from their gear bag. In the deeper water, the crocodile pivoted, beginning a roll. The torque bent Marco sharply, a muffled crack carrying through the water as his femur fractured. The spin loosened the grip just enough for him to break the surface with a gasp, blood blooming around him in thin tendrils. The crocodile surged again, jaws clamping briefly across his hip before a second shake wrenched him sideways. Marco's foot caught on a submerged rock, twisting him clear for a moment. Daniel waded waist deep, swinging the pole down hard across the crocodile's snout. The animal hesitated, jaw flexing, before sliding back toward the shadow of the pier. Marco was dragged to the rocks, leaving a thin red wake. The crocodile made one last rush, but veered off after kicks and strikes from his friends. They pulled him onto the riprap, his legs shredded, femur fractured, and hip gouged. Daniel tightened a belt high on Marco's thigh to slow the bleeding, while Louis pressed the bundled shirt to the wounds. Marco was weak but conscious when sirens neared, and EMS soon carried him up the rocks and rushed him to a trauma center. Marco survived after surgery and months of rehabilitation, though he walks with a limp and bears extensive scarring on his right leg. County crews extended fencing and posted fines for feeding wildlife, and weekend patrols now sweep the pier. Dawn comes quieter in the backcountry, a father and son chasing trout along mangrove edges until their flat skiff intersects a patrol route no one sees. It was March 3rd, 2016. The pre-dawn was glass flat in the Florida Keys backcountry, a soft gray seam dividing the dark silhouettes of mangroves from a sky just beginning to pale. The water lay still except for a faint ripple from the incoming tide. Turtle grass waved in deeper pockets, and oyster-studded banks pressed close to narrow creeks. Mullet flicked at the surface, sending rings across the calm, while a heron stood motionless in the shallows, its reflection sharp on the water. Far off, an osprey called. The only man-made sound was the faint click of a push-pull against aluminum as a small skiff eased along a dark, winding ribbon of water. The mangrove roots on either side arched overhead, almost closing the passage in places. At the stern stood Joel Raines, a 44-year-old manager of an auto parts store in Key Largo, and a dedicated weekend angler. Fishing had been his way of resetting after long weeks behind the counter. At the bow was his 12-year-old son Tyler, wearing a faded ball cap and concentrating hard as he practiced tying loop knots. On the deck beside him, a neat row of topwater plugs gleamed faintly in the weak light, their paint chipped from past hookups. Father and son had a routine. On calm mornings, they'd fish a sheltered creek mouth where sea trout chased pilchards at first light, making the trip and return in under an hour. Joel pulled the skiff with an easy rhythm, each push sending the boat gliding noiselessly forward. Tyler cast toward a tangle of roots where the water darkened, his lure arcing perfectly until it went just wide and snagged in the mangroves. Joel smiled faintly, set the push-pull down, then moved to the forward casting platform. Kneeling, he leaned over the gunwale to reach the snag. He pulled the pair of pliers from the pouch at his hip and pinched the hook's barb to work it free. The bow of the skiff nudged gently against the roots, rocking with the faint slap of water underneath. In the Florida Keys, American crocodiles can grow over 15 feet long and are well known to locals as dangerous predators. Though sightings are common, so are warnings. Attacks have happened in quiet backcountry creeks where they patrol at first light. Using mangrove roots for cover, they can surge several meters in seconds. The crushing bite and rolling twist built to overpower anything in reach. Under the mangrove overhang, a faint wake formed, so subtle it might have been missed entirely. The surface lifted in a low, sliding bulge. No splash, no warning. The head emerged first, broad and pale, the nostrils flaring just before the jaws opened. What had looked like nothing more than a shadow in the water revealed itself in a smooth, deliberate surge. The crocodile clamped down on Joel's right thigh and hip in a sideways grip, locking his upper and lower leg against the skiff's gunwale. The force jolted the boat. Tyler grabbed the console rail, eyes wide. Joel's body slid backward off the platform, his pliers clattering to the deck. The crocodile reversed in a single powerful pull, dragging Joel overboard into the narrow channel. Tyler lunged for the butt of Joel's fishing rod and jammed it between the gunwale and the croc's jawline. The rod bowed under the strain, then splintered with a sharp crack. The crocodile surfaced just beyond the skiff and shifted its grip forward, jaws closing around Joel's lowered torso. Its tail swept once, sending a sheet of water over the bow and spinning the skiff halfway around. The first roll began slowly, then accelerated into a violent spin. Air burst from Joel's mouth and nose. The muffled sound of ribs giving way carried faintly across the water. Tyler lost his footing and fell backward against the cooler, pain shooting through his knee, but he stayed aboard. The crocodile completed the roll and settled low in the water, Joel now limp in its grip. It sank, pulling him entirely under the brown-green surface. For a few seconds, there was only the slap of water against roots. Farther downstream, the crocodile surfaced with Joel crosswise in its jaws, adjusted its grip, and sank again. Bubbles rose, then stopped. Tyler called out for his father, voice cracking. The skiff drifted against the mangrove root, its bow rocking. Joel's life jacket, torn free during the struggle, floated up and snagged in the roots, bobbing lightly with the tide. The stillness returned. Only the drone of insects and the faint movement of the tide remained. By the time search crews arrived, the sun had cleared the mangroves and lit the creek in gold. Divers swept the area while wildlife officers scanned the banks. Counselors met Tyler and his mother at the dock, staying close as the boy recounted what had happened. Within a week, new warning signs appeared at youth fishing clinics and along popular backcountry creeks. They reminded boaters to keep hands and knees inside the boat when working close to mangrove edges, especially in low light and falling tides. From the quiet of the Florida backcountry, our path shifts west, where music fades from a backyard party and a Louisiana canal hides still water and the shadowed mouth of a culvert. It was January 9th, 2013. Past midnight along a two-lane road in the Barataria Basin. The air was heavy with the damp cold of winter marshland, each breath carrying the faint tang of salt and rot. Sodium lamps stood at long intervals, their amber cones spilling across patches of asphalt and into the black sheen of a narrow drainage canal. The canal's banks were faced in concrete riprap, the angled slabs slick with algae and darkened by years of tide and runoff. Water lapped softly at the stones. At the road's midpoint, a culvert yawned under the pavement, a dark, circular opening where brackish flow pulsed in and out with the faintest tide-driven breath. Reeds leaned in the night breeze, rattling like dry paper. Insects sang in the high, constant drone. Every few minutes, a mullet popped the surface with a soft plop, vanishing again into the shadow. A quarter-mile away, the faint glow of porch lights flickered through the silhouettes of live oaks. Three friends, Alex 23, Bree 22, and Nico 24, eased a compact sedan onto the gravel shoulder. They had just left a backyard birthday party, still in jeans and light jackets against the chill. Music still leaked from somewhere behind them, softened by distance, a faint thump under the constant background hum of crickets. They weren't here to fish or explore. Nico had asked for a quick stop to rinse his face and shake off the beer buzz before getting onto the highway. They climbed out, stretching limbs stiff from the short drive. Shoes came off to keep them dry, and phone flashlights clicked on, the thin beams wobbling across stone and water. Their shadows stretched long across the slope. As they talked, Nico's car key slipped from his hoodie pocket, bounced once on the concrete, and slid partway down the riprap. It lodged in a small gap between two stones, just above the waterline. The three crouched low, balancing on their toes. The beam from Alex's phone caught the silver gleam of the key winking against the dark. Nico moved first, easing closer to the culvert mouth where the key rested. The stone shifted slightly under his weight. His fingertips brushed the metal. The American alligator dominates Louisiana's marshes, canals, and bayous. Large adults can exceed 12 feet and weigh over half a ton. They are capable of sudden short-range ambushes up to 2 body lengths, often from a complete standstill. A single clamp from their jaws can fracture long bones, while rapid side-to-side shakes tear muscle and connective tissue. Rolling in the water multiplies torque, dislocating joints or removing entire limbs. At night, culvert mouths become prime ambush sites. Bait fish are funneled in by the tide, attracting predators to the shadowed opening. The surface at the culvert lip swelled outward as if a heavy object rose beneath it. No splash, only a thick, sliding bulge of water. Nostrils appeared first, then eyes, 2 cold, unblinking points set high on the broad skull. The alligator lunged. The distance between shadow and stone vanished in less than a second. Nico's foot slipped on algae-slick concrete, and he pitched forward into the water, one knee smacking a submerged slab with a hollow knock. Before he could recover, the gator's jaws clamped around his right calf. Denim tore, teeth punched through skin into muscle. The animal began pulling him toward the culvert pocket. Alex dropped to his stomach, grabbing Nico's forearm with both hands. His shoes scraped on the concrete as he braced, muscles straining. The gator abruptly let go, only to re-bite higher up on the thigh. A savage lateral shake followed. Water sprayed in a wide arc. Bits of reed and mud flung into the air. Nico was dragged a meter deeper. Alex shifted his grip, reaching lower. In that instant, the gator's head swung and its jaws closed on Alex's left forearm at the very edge of its bite zone. The clamp came with a sharp, dry crack, snapping the bone in his forearm under the pressure. Alex tore his arm back, leaving deep gashes that instantly welled with blood. Bree sprinted to the trunk, hauling out a coiled tow rope. She ran back, tossing one end toward Alex. He snatched it with his good hand, looping it around Nico's chest as the gator rolled once, not a full spin, but enough to twist Nico's knee violently. Something tore. His kneecap shifted grotesquely under the skin. The gator's tail thrashed in tight, powerful sweeps, pushing both predator and prey toward the darkness of the culvert. Bree anchored the other end of the rope around the guardrail post and leaned back with her full weight, gravel skittering under her sneakers. Headlights swung into view from the far bend, a slow-moving pickup. Its beam struck the water, illuminating the gator's ridge back just behind Nico. The sudden light made the animal hesitate, jaws still locked. Alex used the moment to heave on the rope. Nico inched up the slope, water pouring off him. The gator slid backward, released its grip, and with a low, heavy push of the tail, disappeared into the culvert shadow. The canal settled, rings spreading from the mouth until the surface stilled again. Alex's forearm was bleeding badly, skin hanging in ragged strips over the fracture. Nico's thigh and calf bore deep punctures and shredded muscle. The knee bent at an unnatural angle. Bree yanked her belt free, cinching it high on his leg to slow the bleeding. The driver of the pickup jumped out, handing over a folded towel for Alex's arm and calling EMS. Nico's skin had gone pale. His breathing was quick and shallow. Alex held his arm tight against his chest to immobilize it, his face set against the pain. Paramedics arrived within minutes, applying tourniquets and splints before loading both men into the ambulance. Wildlife officers swept the culvert before dawn, but found only the drag marks where the gator had lain in wait. The next day, talk among residents turned to whether fencing or floodlights should be installed along the pull-off, especially where late-night parties tended to spill over to the water's edge. 5 boundaries crossed, 3 dead, 2 alive, and 1 lesson shared along every southern shoreline: never trust still water. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love the one waiting for you on the end screen. Go check it out, and I'll see you there.